Terminator recast Sarah Connor for the first time 19 years ago, and she was as great as the original. Although the Terminator movies introduced the definitive portrayal of Sarah Connor decades earlier, the franchise's first stab at recasting her in Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, was surprisingly successful. The Terminator movies have a naughty chronology, to put it mildly. After the events of 1984's original, The Terminator, and its first sequel, 1990's Terminator 2, Judgment Day, the series frequently retconned its own events in subsequent outings. 2015's Terminator. Genesis retconned both Terminator, Rise of the Machines, and Terminator, Salvation, while 2019's Terminator, Dark Fate retconned its story in turn. This makes Terminator 7's plans tough to guess. However, amidst all of these timeline reshuffles, the Terminator movies have one consistent through line. Despite the Terminator franchise's confusing timeline, Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor remains one of the most iconic action heroines in sci-fi cinema history. A resilient, tough protagonist in The Terminator, Connor became an iconic figure in Terminator 2, Judgment Day. It is tough for any actor to seem powerful besides Arnold Schwarzenegger, but Hamilton convinced even in 2019's otherwise misguided reboot Terminator, Dark Fate. As such, recasting this character for a reboot seems like a tall order. Lena Headey was a great Sarah Connor in Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Despite this, the Terminator franchise's mostly forgotten recasting of Sarah Connor was surprisingly successful. Beginning in 2008 and lasting 2 seasons, Fox's Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles followed Sarah and her son John Connor as the pair tried to stop Skynet's original creation. Years before a career-defining role as Cersei Lannister in Game of Thrones, Lena Headey impresses as a version of Sarah Connor who is recognizable, but never feels like a carbon copy of Hamilton's original character. Headey's take on the character is more interior, focusing on her trauma and the weight of responsibility she feels. This is a smart choice for Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles, since the show has much more screen time to delve into Connors as a character. While Hamilton nails the physicality of the uber-tough heroine, she spends most of her movies in the series running, chasing, escaping, and attacking. Hamilton embodies Sarah Connor at her most ferocious, constantly battling to keep herself and her son alive, let alone save humanity from Skynet. In contrast, Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles gives Headey time to portray Connor in her downtime, revealing a sadder, more human figure. Lena Headey was technically the same Sarah Connor as Linda Hamilton in Terminator. In terms of in-universe lore, Emilia Clarke's Sarah Connor from Terminator Genesis doesn't technically count as a recast version of Hamilton's character. One of the biggest problems with Terminator Genesis was the reboot's bizarre timeline changes, which meant the movie ended up offering new versions of Sarah, John Connor, and Kyle Reese. As such, this wasn't as much of a recast as it was an entire alternate version of the character. In contrast, Headey's Sarah was supposed to be the same Sarah from The Terminator and Terminator 2, Judgment Day, although the show ignores the events of Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. It is impressive that Lena Headey managed to make the character of Sarah Connor her own in only 2 seasons of the series. As such, Headey's take on Sarah Connor is one of only 2 versions of the character. With this in mind, it is impressive that Lena Headey managed to make the character her own in only 2 seasons of the series. Terminator. The Sarah Connor Chronicles was also an underrated series outside of Headey's performance, as the show did an impressive job of recapturing the mood and tone of the blockbuster movies for only a fraction of their budget. Admittedly, the action sequences couldn't match those found in James Cameron's movies, but this was understandable. Linda Hamilton reprised her role as Sarah Connor 28 years after Terminator 2. Although Terminator, The Sarah Connor Chronicles effectively reinvented Sarah Connor's story. This did not stop the franchise from repeatedly retconning the show's story. First, Terminator. Genesis introduced its new versions of Sarah and Kyle and their new timeline. Then 2019's Terminator. Dark Fate killed off John Connor in its opening scene while he was still only a child. This proved the reboot would ignore everything that came after Terminator 2, Judgment Day, including Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles. Unfortunately for the creators of Terminator, Dark Fate, changing the story of the series wasn't enough to salvage its reputation. Despite earning an impressive 70% critical rating on Rotten Tomatoes, Terminator, Dark Fate was a disastrous box office flop that earned only $261 million on a budget of almost $200 million. Terminator. Dark Fate's failure left the franchise in limbo, meaning future installments could bring back Hetty's character from Terminator. The Sarah Connor Chronicles if the creators of the Terminator movies want to do something new with the material.